I love to go wandering along the mountain track, and as I go, I love to sing, says the lyrics of the well-known song. We, as a species, have traveled all over and kept doing so for thousands of years, migrating with the seasons until we became sedentary, settling in the villages, towns and cities of civilized society. Did we use maps? Not necessarily, as we shall explore here. Many scholars of the past have tried in earnest to reconcile maps with what we knew, but there's one thing that all forget: memory. Before maps, there were ways we remembered journeys, especially frequent trips, by use of markings, markers and eventually, songs. There are lots of claims of ancient maps that lead here, there and everywhere, but most were reconciling information and trying to make it congruent to form a comprehensive, once and for all, map. Reports of lost lands, islands of abundance, sacred isles and otherwise all derive from spurious maps that can neither be proved or dismissed, being saved as curiosities of the past. No one drew maps until relatively recently in the larger scheme of things, but we have always traveled. To think otherwise is just ridiculous. We have known routes change and followed established migratory paths for thousands of years, by use of markers, markings and songs. The singing came a lot later, but how do we know that we traveled? Because the evidence is very obvious and there. At the last glacial maximum, LGM, between 26,500 and 19,000 years ago, we were very busy wandering around. The majority of these travels were somewhat restricted due to a whacking great ice sheet limiting our journey north, but we still explored. From what we can gather, it was consciously collected as information that goes back 14,000 years, if not further. The year 12,209 BCE has become an established marker thanks to those who have studied certain Indian texts. However, I would argue that when other sources of information are revised, we shall arrive at a much earlier date for such a collective memory to have started. Yet the 13,000th century BCE is not something I'll quibble over, as it is a great starting point. Another point to make is that, it wasn't just us that traveled, for other species, including other hominids, had undoubtedly traveled with us and before us along these routes. The use of water vessels, boats, is also going to shock you, as we've been using them a lot longer than we could possibly imagine. There was one route in particular that is no longer used, due to the rise in sea levels, that was frequented, that no one has really considered. So, in short, other species and seafaring types have existed an awful lot longer than anyone expected. One of the problems, you see, is the arrival of people in the South Americas and knowledge of a partially covered Antarctica and knowledge of the phenomena known as the Northern Lights in the Arctic. How could anyone have known unless they had traveled there? Knowledge of these things has been known from experience, and this is what we are going to look at. One of the best sources for this historic knowledge is found in the Ramayana. Niall Shoak has been amazing in his calculation of the events, to establish this information as being 14,000 years old. The text itself dates to circa 500 BCE, but to confirm, the story is substantially older. It also talks about a different type of human as well, but that's for another article. The text of the Ramayana describes certain places, markers and phenomena, things that were established as fact from collective history of wandering. It goes beyond the first Proto-Indo-European travel to the Indus Valley, the Fertile Crescent, to a time when hominids traveled extensively with the seasons, before Homo sapiens came along. The reason we know this is due to finding remnants of what they ate in shared dwellings, stop-off, caves such as the Devasinian Cave, and locations along the coastlines. When they stopped, strangers and travelers would exchange routes and ideas, which is part of how we progressed. One of the first things we hominids ever did by way of communication was draw on walls and in caves. The drawings would be indicative of what was good to eat, hunt and collect. Some petroglyphs and geoglyphs have existed for thousands of years, simply as markers of what was available and plentiful in the area. Some larger scenes may depict a herd of cattle being hunted or lured to drops, where injured animals would be finished off, and these depictions often occur in high places, plateaus or large flat areas where animals could be guided to a drop. Even today, In some locations, the markers, cairns or stone heaps, and hunting blinds can still be seen, and one can perceive the journey taken to drive animals off a cliff. It is really staggering when you see them. These blinds and drops have been around since at least the last glacial maximum, possibly before the ice encroached in some areas. Other indicators are the inscribing of plants and other life on rocks, drawing maps, and some very interesting shapes in humanoid form. Some also show how to catch the animal by drawing the implements used, explaining a hydrological system if using a tide as part of the process, one exists in Canada, or what method works best. Sometimes, you see, artificial banks or walkways were constructed, especially in areas liable to heavy tides or flooding. So at times, banks and walls were man-made to control the environment, especially tides. In marshland, people would often live on raised platforms for the same reasons, and due to this, a drawing may indicate floating houses, or looking like they are on stilts. All this knowledge, before spoken word, was drawn on walls and in rock. Sugriva, in the Ramayana, explains his travels by way of an allegory, a tale of reconciliation and finding his love. The text talks of groups who traveled east, north, south and west. Some very interesting markers are mentioned, that display the aforementioned very well. Sugriva talks of the south being dark and having rivers and some areas of greenery, but warns not to go here. It's Antarctica of that time, where ice around the northern coast had receded, and the darkness is the 6 months without sun that it experiences due to the Earth's tilt. The text talks of the north, where the phenomena of the northern lights are. This is the Arctic Circle, of which the route traveled in this tale travels from mid-eastern Siberia down to the Antarctic via the oriental coastline, and possibly an internal route through mainland China. Now this is where things get really interesting. The journey west has a marker, as does the east. These are the petroglyphs and geoglyphs I have been describing. In the Ramayana, the west is marked by a palm with 10 gold heads. Investigation has led many to consider the Alps as this eastern marker. Here, there are no palms as such, yet there are silver fir trees, which appear similar to the Palmyra trees of India. No silver fir exists at the site of the rock I will mention, but there was arguably one here at the time. So a combination of this and two other aspects could be the boundary. In northern Italy, just before the Alps, there is a rock covered in pictograms in Lombardy. At the foot of the Pizzo Trasero Glacier, in Lombardy's Stelvio National Park, some 10,000 feet above sea level, are the highest rock engravings in Europe. From here, one can see 10 peaks of the Alps that would have the sun behind them at sunset. At that time, they probably didn't go any further north due to the European ice sheet, so was the furthest east they went. The text explains that this was the marker of the western boundary. Next, the journey east leads them through the now covered Sunderland of the Oriental, which is now the Philippines, Malaysia and many other archipelagos. From here, this far south, they traveled by land and sea, island hopping over the sea, that was some 400 feet lower back then, to the coast of what is now Peru. According to the text, Indra's mark is here, indicating the furthest eastern point. However, it's not Shiva's mark at all, it's a trident, a very large one that is etched into the hill, some 58 to 60 cm deep into the hillside. This trident is a large gig, used for fishing flounders. Many scholars are perplexed by it, but it's actually surprisingly simple. If one looks from above, you'll see that the trident is below an area that has been shaped into a large flounder with at least 3 paths up to the top of it. It's a huge fish that's etching and construction has succumbed to the passage of time, but still visible enough. I suspect quite heavily that the availability of flounders here was evident as a staple food source, so possibly venerated as well. The paths leading up to the flounder help to deduce this as well as its very construction. So once again, a marker has been utilized as a boundary. As an aside, academics have often wondered about how people came to the South Americas, and the route I just mentioned, from Australia, New Zealand up to Peru, is probably how the genetic markers discovered in some South American tribes, is often from Micronesia and the Orient. Most believe that they traveled the Pacific Rim and ventured over the Beringian land bridge to the north, But if you look at the fault lines in the South Pacific and the islands, a path can be established from the Oriental Sunderland island hopping to the Peruvian shoreline. I firmly believe that this route existed prior to ice sheets melting and rising sea levels by 400 feet. More islands would have been visible and accessible. Some have stayed there on the respective islands, like Easter Island, French Polynesia, Cook Islands, Samoa, Tonga and many, many more. Also, people tend to forget the Antipodean Sunderland on the west coast of South America that existed. Some believe it is the mythical land of Mu, but that's something we will never know, just as we'll never know the location of Avalon or Atlantis. Many areas have been lost to time due to declining and rising sea levels according to the ice ages. With this anecdote, that Sugriva relays, that he has walked, we surely can see how the ancient wisdom, nay markers, have helped shape our journeys and travels around the post-ice age world. We have known other lands, traveled diverse routes and been capable of island hopping since 14,000 years ago. Whether or not Sugriva did see these for himself, well, we'll never know, but the evidence that 14,000 years we knew of the Antarctic darkness, northern lights of the Arctic, the Swiss Alps and Peruvian flounder fishermen, states that, yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say. We knew our roots and way about. Don't you?